Welcome to another installment of Strange Planet. And on this episode, we pull back the curtain on a chilling reality that sounds like it belongs in a dystopian nightmare, yet it is happening right now. Imagine a world where a peaceful spiritual movement is outlawed, its followers hunted, imprisoned, and harvested for their organs to fuel a shadowy transplant empire. This is the reality for Falun Gong practitioners in China, and my guest has risked his life to expose it. From the stages of Shen Yun Performing Arts to the halls of the U.S. Congress, he's a voice for the voiceless, shining a light on one of the most heinous human rights atrocities of our time. Get ready for a conversation that will shake you to your core. Leeshai Lemish is more than a master of ceremonies. He's a warrior for truth in a world that often turns a blind eye. For nearly 2 decades, he's been the charismatic host of Shen Yun Performing Arts, the world-renowned classical Chinese dance company that brings 5,000 years of culture to life on stages from New York to Tokyo. But his mission goes far beyond art. A scholar with degrees in Chinese history and international relations, Leeshai has dedicated his life to exposing the Chinese Communist Party's brutal persecution of Falun Gong practitioners, a campaign of torture, imprisonment, and forced organ harvesting that's claimed countless lives since 1999. Arrested and beaten by Chinese police in Tiananmen Square for protesting this genocide, Leeshai survived a broken jaw and jail time, emerging with an unshakable resolve. He's testified before the U.S. Congress, documented over 100 CCP attempts to sabotage Shen Yun's global performances, and hosts the podcast Shen Yun Voices, amplifying survivors' stories of unimaginable horror. From death threats to diplomatic conspiracies, Leeshai has faced the CCP's wrath head-on, all while championing a message of hope, resilience, and cultural revival. And he joins us to reveal the truth about a medical genocide that's still unfolding and what it means for the world. Leeshai, welcome to Strange Planet. How are you?
Thank you. What an introduction, and what a good title. Your show just matches this story so perfectly. It's a strange planet, and this is a very strange story that's hard to believe if you don't really look at the facts.
And for here in Canada, where our government currently is talking about tightening relations with Communist China amidst the trade war with the United States, it just, to me, it's unconscionable that we're cozying up to a genocidal regime. But take us back to the late 1990s. What was it about Falun Gong's rapid growth, reportedly outnumbering the CCP's membership, that triggered such a ferocious crackdown by the Chinese regime?
Well, that in a nutshell is basically it. You have a tremendously popular practice. Was actually only introduced to the public in 1992. So in China, there's this traditional lineage of practices that are passed down from master to disciple for many generations, centuries sometimes. In Taoism, there are many practices like this. In Buddhism, some of them were continued through monasteries and temples, and others were just secretly in a forest or on a mountain, or even in the city sometimes. And Falun Gong comes from that lineage. And so in the 70s and 80s, right before Falun Gong's explosion onto the scene, there were all these Qigong practices. So think of Tai Chi, for example, people doing slow-moving exercises in a park all over China. There wasn't much healthcare at the time. They just came out of the Cultural Revolution. People were looking for something to do and believe in and get healthy. And Qigong just spread like wildfire throughout China. And then in 1992, Mr. Li Hongzhi, who Falun Gong practitioners call Master Li, says, actually, let me teach this practice, and it's not going to be for making money like many of these other practices were. It's going to be free, always going to be free. And Qigong actually is not just for healing and getting fit. It is actually for spiritual cultivation, a term called xiulian in Chinese, which, in English, that's the best we could do, is spiritual practice, spiritual refinement, being better people, and then even better people, and eventually getting to a state that's kind of above, spiritually above the mundane. And so Falun Gong becomes extremely popular. And then from 1992 to 1994, 5, he's going around the country giving lectures, and people are attending these, and it just spreads from word of mouth. People start feeling better, healthier. They're doing these exercises. And so by the late 90s, like you said, the Chinese Communist Party looks around and says, wow, there is 70 to 100 million people practicing this, more than the 66 million members of the Communist Party at the time. Now, in the late 90s, the Chinese government was actually very supportive of Falun Gong. They had documentaries that you can still see today about on the state-run media saying how wonderful this was. They gave awards to Master Li for his contribution to society. Party members practiced it. Family members of all standing members of the Politburo, these are the elders of the party, they all had people in their family practicing it. But Jiang Zemin, who was the chairman of the Communist Party at the time, he said, no, we have to crush Falun Gong. And if we don't do it, and this is what he said, it will be the biggest embarrassment to the Communist Party and to Marxism. And so he pit Marxism against Falun Gong. He said this is going to be a battle for the spirit of communism in a way. And he said we're going to crush this in 3 months, and we're going to break them physically, we're going to bankrupt them financially, and we're going to ruin their reputation. And this is exactly what they've done for more than a quarter century now. And as you hinted at the beginning, it's now gone overseas as well. So then basically overnight, there were some hints of this if we're going to get granular about the history that this was coming. But basically overnight on July 20th, 1999, state police go and arrest people from their homes, from their beds, people who were called coordinators, and their job was basically to carry the boombox to the park and press play in the morning. And because there's no list, there's no registry, but these people were arrested all over the country because they had been spying on them for a while already. And then on July 22nd at 3 p.m., all of a sudden, all the television broadcasts, all the radio, everything just stopped. And it was one of these kind of war of the worlds kind of moments. And it was, okay, we interrupt this broadcast to bring you this breaking news. Falun Gong is banned. It is evil. It is anti-China. Stop practicing, or you will have the wrath of the biggest dictatorship in world history coming down on you. And so right away, people would go to, they had a system of petitions offices in their local government, let's say your town hall. People would go and they'd write a letter saying, this must be some misunderstanding. Everybody knows we're just trying to be good people. How could, and people believed in the Communist Party back then. I mean, these are people who grew up with it. And that's a whole other story of the brainwashing in the Communist Party of multiple generations. But these people were not rebel rousers. They were not political activists. They didn't have any axe to grind with the Communist Party. Yeah, they experienced all this stuff, but they believed in the mission overall. And they say, this is a misunderstanding. You just don't know who we are. Let us tell you who we are. And they write these letters. They say, Falun Gong has benefited me in this way. My family's harmonious, saved my marriage, saved my health. And this must be some joke. And they go to the office and then they're arrested. And then their family members go, where's our family member? Then they're arrested. And it just goes on and on. And so then you have hundreds of thousands of people going to Tiananmen Square, which is what I did later, as you mentioned, because that was the only place they could go. They couldn't go to the government. The media was still going 24/7. Articles and magazines, just all this had been produced for years in advance, attacking Falun Gong. And all of society, at first they were like, what is this? This doesn't make any sense. But over time, the propaganda, and there's some specific cases where it really turned, really had a strong effect. And people started turning against their neighbors and their family members, just like they did in the Cultural Revolution, just like we've seen throughout history in other fascist regimes. And then you have hundreds of thousands of people going to Tiananmen Square. They hold a banner, and the banner says 3 words: truth, compassion, forbearance, the principles of Falun Gong, which is what we did as well. And those people would then be arrested, beaten up on the square. This was on international television around the world around 2000, 2001. And then they disappear into labor camps and prisons. And then they would sometimes be released and sometimes tortured and killed. And then over time, they had this mass population of Falun Gong prisoners in labor camps, internment camps, concentration camps, and prisons. And around the early 2000s is when we really start seeing organ harvesting.
Yeah, I mean, Falun Gong practitioners are known for their health and their vitality. How did this make them, I guess I'm answering my question as I think of it, but why did this make them prime targets for China's transplant industry?
Well, yeah, so exactly. So for many years, the CCP was claiming that their organs were coming from death row inmates, people who were were murderers, were rapists, were on death row, and they wanted to do one good thing before they're executed. And even that number, and they're not open about the numbers, but Amnesty, for example, and other organizations estimated around 10,000 executed people a year, more than the rest of the world combined. Even if you go by those numbers, it's still not enough for the number of organs that are accounted for in these transplants. And according to the 2019 London Tribunal, they were estimating 60 to 90,000 a year. Now, in the United States, as in Canada, we have a massive a voluntary donation system where you can, on your driver's license, identify yourself as an organ donor. We have about 100 million of those in the United States. And in China, it's a fraction of a percent because that's not a culturally acceptable practice. And they don't have a database. They had no system for this. Where are all these organs coming from? Because even executed criminals, many of them who have hepatitis and other diseases, they cannot be proper organ donors. Don't account for it. And what we discovered was there were actually people, when we first heard about organ harvesting, which was around 2006, from Falun Gong practitioners. And there were a few suspicious things that happened before then. People their body was returned to a family member with massive cuts throughout their body, like something had been removed, and all these various stories that murmurs about that. But we really only heard about it around 2006 when a nurse came out and said this was happening in this place called Sujiatun in northeastern China. And she was talking about her husband who was having PTSD from doing all these operations and killing all these people, and they were removing corneas. And one thing I need to explain here is we're not talking about somebody being anesthetized and then they take a kidney and they leave a kidney and let him go on, and then he realizes an organ's missing. That's not it. They take everything. It's livers, it's hearts, it's two cornea, it's both kidneys. And so when these stories came out, there were researchers overseas because nobody believed it. It sounds so out of there. What, you take these people who are arrested for basically doing yoga or being Buddhist, and you put them in jail, and then you decide, hey, let's kill them for their organs. We can make money off of this. It sounds ridiculous, but this is actually what was happening, and nobody believed the story. And journalists who wanted to cover it, a woman by the name of Didi Tatlau, journalist for the New York Times, who specialized in organ transplant. That was her beat. She went to the editor of the New York Times, said, I want to cover this, said, no, leave this story alone.
Sorry, who is receiving these organs? Are these like elite members of the Communist Party? Are they first in line?
They are probably among the first in line for sure. And then anybody who can afford it. Japan, Taiwan, a lot of Asians, including Asian Americans, but not only. So I'll give you an example of this, and then I want to get back to the example of how we know about that they're healthy organs and all that. When I started looking into this, in my capacity in looking at human rights issues, and I was working with a man named Ethan Gutman who wrote a book about this called The Slaughter. And I was in Israel talking to a man who was in trouble, and this was reported in the news in Israel, which is how I found out about it, for tax evasion. But the tax evasion was he was working as an organ broker. So he was arranging people from Israel to go to China to get transplants. But that's not what they got him for. They got him for tax evasion. So I spoke with him, and he said, look, I was told these organs were coming from executed prisoners. Here we have people who need a heart or they're going to die. We don't have enough hearts in Israel. So I made the connection. What are you going to do about it? Right? I didn't do anything wrong. I believe I did the right thing. Okay. He introduced me to one of his patients, and this man had a heart transplant. He says, I went to China. They put me up in this hotel. I booked it several weeks in advance. I went there. They put me and my family in this hospital hotel, treated me wonderfully. I got the heart. I came back. And I introduced 13 other people to do the same thing. And these are basically on-demand heart transplants, right? Normally, if you're on the list, you're waiting for somebody to tragically die, say in a motorcycle accident, and then you're rushed and you get, right? You have a small window. You can schedule these surgeries. That means that there's a bank of organs waiting. And they did not develop the ability to do this in a lab, but this came from human beings. And so who are these people? And so these researchers, for example, in Toronto, a woman was doing this. I interviewed her as well back in 2008. And she in Toronto. I think she's actually either in Montreal or Toronto. This woman was calling and pretending to be somebody looking for an organ. And she would call, and she had a very thick accent. She has a regional accent in China. It's very hard to understand. But this is just one example of many people who did this. And she would call and say, I need an organ. Okay, yeah, we can get you a heart, or a liver, whatever, because you did multiple phone calls, different organs, in a couple of weeks or sometimes in a week. Just come on over. We'll take care of the rest. She says, okay, but how do I know the organs are healthy? Don't worry, they're healthy. And then later she started saying, I heard they're coming from Falun Gong. Is that true? Is that what they're, and they say, that's all that we have. They're all like that. That's what they say. And we have multiple recordings of this. And there was a book that came out by two men, David Kilgour and David Matas, both from Canada. Kilgour was, I think, a diplomat who worked in the Asia-Pacific region, and David Matas is still active as a human rights attorney. And they wrote about this in all of these cases, all these phone calls, they're in there, and there's a lot of detail. And they admit openly, they even rave about, our organs are Falun Gong, they're healthy, they meditate, they don't drink, they don't smoke, they're not promiscuous, they have no diseases. That's where they're coming from. Don't worry, come on over, we'll schedule you.
Wow. So the timing, this is Chinese justice. The execution date of this Falun Gong practitioner is scheduled depending on the needs of the organ recipients.
Yes, that is correct, sir. It is reverse on-demand organ transplants. And what I discovered also with Ethan when we were traveling for his book and I was translating for him, we went to Bangkok where Falun Gong practitioners who had just escaped from labor camps, often in northeastern China, cities like Changchun and Jilin, and then they fled usually through Yunnan province on a motorcycle to Burma and then on a boat to Thailand. And then they would wait in Thailand and Bangkok for some kind of resettlement by the United Nations. And they would wait there and they were so fresh out of labor camp or prison that they still had scars from torture that were healing. And I saw these, we have pictures of them. And we would interview them and we talked to so many people that we were a little bit crass even in our interview approach because we said, listen, I don't want to know how Falun Gong benefited you. We believe you it benefited you. I don't want to know about how you stood up and how this is all wrong. We know all that stuff. Tell us, did they give you a physical? And they would look at us shocked because nobody was asking these questions back in 2008. They say, why are you asking me about a physical? They were torturing me. They were beating us. We were working 16 hours a day. I said, I understand. Did they give you a physical though? They said, well, yeah, they gave us a physical. Okay. Did they look at your injuries? No. The broken arm, the burns on the body from electric batons, they cared none of that. What they cared was they did an eye examination, a urine sample, and a blood test. It was all about their organs. And they would do it repeatedly over several weeks. And then we asked them, what about the other inmates, the rapists and murderers and robbers? So no, they weren't given physicals, only Falun Gong practitioners. And then we said, are people disappearing? They said, yeah, sometimes there are these vans that come in the middle of the night and people disappear. And we don't, there's a woman in my cell. There's a man in the other cell. I heard about these stories. I've seen people, they're here one month, they're gone the next. We don't know what happened to them. And the person after person that we interviewed.
Tell me about Changpang Ming. This is a survivor. He revealed partial organ removal while he was in prison for practicing Falun Gong. I mean, how does his firsthand account and others like it shape our understanding of this atrocity?
Well, so his story is, is very well documented. You can read about it if you want more details on faluninfo.net. I think what's interesting is it's very hard to find a survivor of this kind of organ harvesting, right? You're not going to have somebody there who's missing a limb. This is people who their execution method is the removal of their organs. They're still alive on the table. They're given minimal anesthetic so that's what they say. Even in these recordings that the researchers made, they said, yes, they're alive, the organs are fresh. That's the best way. They say all this stuff very openly. And now they've kind of clamped down on it. They're not as open about it. But back in the day, even though this is still happening, now they've known to shut up about it. But we have even websites. We have copies of websites in Chinese and photos of pictures that for sale on like these bulletin boards in little villages advertising this. All this is documented. And so you're not going to have survivors. So what happened with his case, I don't know if it was botched or were in there for something else and they took the opportunity to grab something else along the way and then something happened. For whatever reason, he's missing parts of his organs and he somehow survived. And what's really interesting about his case, beyond the horror of that element, is that he's gotten death threats here in the United States, in New York, not far from where I live. And there are people broke into his home, and there were tractor tracks on pickup truck tracks on his lawn. He luckily wasn't home that day. He's gotten multiple threats. What we do have as far as witnesses, beyond the nurse who came out in 2006 that I mentioned, are people who spoke, especially Uyghurs, who spoke about being in these vans that were kind of transplant ambulances where they would go to an execution site or the place where they would execute these prisoners, in this case Uyghurs. And they were brought in alive and they gave him a shot and they took out the organs. And they had to do this over and over again. And a couple of these people actually fled and are abroad and have testified about this. And this is all very well documented. And so we do have those. It would be great for more medical practitioners who took the Hippocratic Oath to actually come out and speak out about this. And then you get into issues of complicity of other countries. Frankly, in the United States right now, we have a bill that's in the Senate, started in the House, it was passed, it was introduced by a Republican and a Democrat. It's called the Falun Gong Protection Act. And there's also another bill about organ harvesting specifically that is broader because this has spread to Uyghurs and possibly other groups like Tibetans and House Christians. But the Uyghurs and Falun Gong are the two big ones that we know about. and it passed through House and is now in the Senate and is addressing this. And it specifically talks about, okay, if these doctors in China have any assets in the United States, we can freeze them. If there are officials involved in this, because it's always through military hospitals, at least it's how it started, and through the party system, then uh, we can have penalties for them. They can't travel to the United States. Their kids can't go to school here. Their properties can be frozen or taken. And then also, we should not be training these people in doing transplants because we have these doctors who are mass murderers coming to North America. We're working with them as colleagues. We think they're trying to save people's lives, for every organ they transplant, they murder somebody else. And so actually, Israel has passed legislation about this many years ago. Taiwan has had some, and there are other countries as well. But it's a drop in the bucket. The mass transplant industry is obviously your Communist Party officials and rich people in China, as well as throughout East Asia, and then the United States and Canada for sure.
Shen Yun was founded to revive traditional Chinese culture, but it also depicts organ harvesting in its performances. How did you and the performers decide to weave this grim reality into the artistry?
It's a fine line because, you can't show this horror. I mean, we're so immune and numb now with horror movies and things to these scenes, but I wouldn't even actually show this in a movie, let alone on stage, exactly how it plays out. It's too horrible to imagine, and that's no problem. No wonder if these people have PTSD from doing it. So on stage in Shen Yun, we do it in a subtle way, through art, through dance, but you get the point. You definitely get the point. So Shen Yun was founded by Falun Gong practitioners, so that is our direct connection to the story. When the persecution started in China, there were people practicing Falun Gong all over the world, people like myself who benefited from the practice and said, this is amazing that we're here in America, and many people are Chinese, and people just like us in China are being rounded up and killed and tortured and killed in horrible ways. And I mean, the methods that they use, they would not embarrass the Spanish Inquisition, the stuff that they do. And what can we do about it? So, we pounded the pavement. We handed out flyers. We went to Congress and went to Parliament. I've been in parades in Vancouver and in Toronto and Ottawa. And, many of us traveled the world on our budget, whatever we could do to try to raise awareness. Where if Jiang Zemin went somewhere like Iceland or Lithuania, we followed him. And we did all these things. But, the press conferences we held were empty. The media would not show up. We'd have all these beautiful packets laid out and nobody would show up. Everybody wanted access to the China market. People were losing their visas trying to cover this. A man by the name of Ian Johnson with the Wall Street Journal got a Pulitzer for covering it, but most everybody else was ignoring the story, especially after a couple of years when compassion fatigue kind of set in. And so we thought, what else could we do? And that's why I went to Tiananmen Square. It was around that time, but this was my way to say, well, let's let the Chinese people at least know that we know about this. Let's let our fellow Falun Gong practitioners in China know that we haven't forgotten about them.
Yeah. They broke the police broke your jaw while you were there, right?
Yeah, they I guess smacked across the face, and it was very spontaneous. People thought it was very well organized. I actually came up for myself. I came up with the idea on my own. I was in college, and there was somebody who came in to talk about study abroad in China, and I thought, well, I'm a Falun Gong practitioner. I can't really do that, though it sounds amazing. But wait a minute, maybe I should go to China and do something else. Maybe I'll just go put a banner up or do something. And I talked to a friend of mine, and a man named Adam from San Francisco. And I talked to him and I said, hey, I have this idea. What do you think? He says, that's funny. I was thinking about the same thing. And not only that, I know a few people from Germany. And they knew people from Sweden. Before we knew it, we had 35 people from 12 different countries. And I met most of them for the first time at 2 p.m., November 20th, 2001 on Tiananmen Square. That was the first time I saw any of them or had any communication with them. And all we did, I think I have a picture of it right there. This is it. This is us. That's it. That's all we did. We sat there in meditation. That's me right there in the blue. And we had this banner, Zhen Chai Ren in Chinese, truth, compassion, forbearance in English. You see the Mao Zedong in the background. This is middle of Tiananmen Square. 30 seconds after this picture, there were police vans all around us. They were waiting for us somehow and knew that we were coming. And then they threw us into the vans, beat us up. They took a couple times to get me. And then they took us to the detention center, and literally we saw blood on the walls. There were blood stains and handprints of blood on the walls, and then we got the nice foreigner treatment. So I had a dislocated jaw, I got a kick in the crotch, I got my passport taken and threatened and all these different things. But the policeman who was beating me up, I'll never forget this guy's face and the look in his eye. His look was, I hate the fact that you're not Chinese and I can't just kill you right now. it was just so obvious. And he actually had to be removed later because he beat up a few more people, and they were afraid that something more was going to happen. And eventually they put us in a detention center. They tried bringing us food, and we were on hunger strike at this point because we don't know how long we're going to be there. And as soon as they brought the food, the cameras came out. And then we said, no, 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 we don't want the food. And then eventually, after 27 hours, I was put on an airplane. And the policeman walked and stood right by my seat the entire time to make sure I leave until the right before the door closed, he got off. And I'm sitting here, and I got three other guys next to me who are with me. And they hand us the China Daily, which is the propaganda in English of the Chinese Communist Party, their newspaper. And they have an article there, and it says 35 non-Chinese foreigners came to China. So far, so good. They were sent by anti-China foreign forces like the CIA. They were treated very nicely, put up in a hotel, and sent back today. And I'm sitting there. I can't talk at this point. My jaw still clicks right now. It's 24 years later. The guy next to me's got a broken nose, two broken fingers. The guy next to him's got broken ribs. My shoes are gone. And I'm reading this paper and I go, it is so easy to lie to people. You control the media. I mean, everybody's going to see is who's going to know the truth, right? Who's going to know what actually happened and let alone why we went there and the whole bigger story of the persecution. And this is perhaps right before organ harvesting was starting. And we said, if this isn't stopped, it's going to get worse and it's going to go to other groups. And including things that we were seeing there of transnational repression and how the CCP was exporting its persecution to the streets of the United States and Canada and beating people up in the streets and breaking into people's homes and spying. They would leave, we would be walking in a park, let's say in the mall in Washington, D.C., for example, and we'd have a conversation without our cell phones. And, we'd have these recordings of our conversations played back to us, back at our home voicemail, back when we had, answering machines. There's so many examples like this, burnings of cars, slashing of tires, all this stuff.
Well, the communist Chinese are operating police stations here in Canada, right under right under our noses, and intimidating Chinese Canadians. There are communist surveillance systems in Chinese restaurants in Vancouver. I understand it's unimaginable.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot once we actually get into that, and we have, you could go into all the fentanyl and all this stuff too, COVID, of course. But to get back to your previous question about Shen Yun, so we were just saying, what can we do to raise awareness? And I was on an academic track, like you mentioned. I was going to be like, well, I'm going to write about this academically. This is important. Nobody's writing about this, not the media, not the professors. I got to talk about this. I can do this. Both my parents are professors. It felt easy. And somebody came to me and said, you know what we want? We want to put on a show. For the Chinese New Year, because the embassy puts on their show, but it really doesn't represent Chinese people. It's all just Communist Party propaganda. Let's have our own real traditional Chinese show. And I said, what are you talking about? People are being murdered. I'm writing a paper literally about whether this is genocide or not. And people are being murdered. I'm not going to do this song and dance thing. No. And then she came back again. And like after a few times, it became easier. Just fine. I'll do it. And I hosted this performance. This was in Cal State, Los Angeles. It was a lot of fun, and people had a good time, and they cracked some joke in Chinese, and it was a good time. And then the next year, now I'm in London, they had another performance at Radio City Music Hall, and this was a bigger venue, 7,000 people, 3 shows of 7,000 people, and there were all these other companies. It was kind of at that point, kind of a mishmash. So you had some Chinese stories, but there was also the Empire Brass Quintet, and there was some Washington School of Ballet for some reason. All kinds of groups came in together to do this. There was a clown, all these different things. So it was kind of funny if you look back at it, and I said, okay, I'll do that. And that was... I started seeing the power of performing arts to move people, because we did have a dance talking about not organ harvesting. We didn't even know about it at the time, 2006. I think it was just coming out. This was December 2006. It must have just been coming out around that time. But we didn't have a dance about it, showing the persecution. And I thought, wow, 7,000 people get to see it. And art has this power to touch people directly that, academic writing maybe has a harder time doing. And so later that summer, they said there's a tryout. And we're actually going to have this performing arts company do this for real. Let's do this for real. Instead of just grabbing artists and let's have our own headquarters and train people and train the next generation of dancers. And we're going to specialize in classical Chinese dance and music and enough of this ballet and other stuff. And we're going to have an orchestra, and we're going to have MCs, which is my role. And so we had tryouts. I got the gig. And then I joined Shen Yun in that December, and we started touring around the world, with our first tour being the 2007 tour. And we had one group. We had about 90 performers and staff members, and we traveled all over. And then there was a lot of demand for it. And there were young people who were dancers who said, I want to join this. I want to be part of this too. And we got 2 groups the next year, and then we got 3. And now we have 8 touring companies that tour around the world. And the show itself is not one narrative. It's not just this is the show of the persecution of Falun Gong in China. Actually, the show is billed as 5,000 years of civilization. And if you look there on the billboards, it says China before communism. We're unabashed about that. That's what we're showing. It's China before communism. We have an opinion about this. And it starts with the legend of the creation of civilization. Where did it come from? And the divine connection of it. And then you have a court dance, and then you have a very masculine dance. And you have the story of the Monkey King from Journey to the West, which is completely whimsical with all these crazy, colorful, magical characters. And then you have multiple other stories. And then there's a dance about the persecution of Falun Gong. And it shows people practicing peacefully in a park. And then all of a sudden, the goons from the Communist Party jump on them, and then they're arrested. And then there's organ harvesting, and there's a blackout, so you don't see it exactly. And then, and then there's a spirit of hope that emerges from it, from faith and from compassion and from helping each other. You get this sense of hope for a better future. And then it moves on to other stories. And so that's the structure of the show. And because of that, because of these reasons, the CCP really, as you can imagine, doesn't like us and has been trying to stop us.
Well, I think you've documented over 100 CCP attempts to sabotage Shen Yun globally. Can you share maybe a specific chilling example of their tactics, especially here in North America?
Yeah, so I think there's over 160 at this point, and I'm having a hard time keeping up. I started documenting this in 2010 when I first started noticing them, and I went back and got the earlier ones. So we have that, and all along they've been doing. And like you mentioned, the tactics have changed. I'll give you one example. When one of our buses was leaving from Ottawa to drive to Montreal, and we perform in many cities in Canada. I think it was like 8 or so last year. In a routine pre-trip inspection, the driver found a cut that was this kind of crescent-shaped cut on the front right tire of the bus, of our dancer bus, and it was very, very deep. And he said, "Oh, I better get this checked out and fixed." And he brought this to a mechanic, and the mechanic said, "This is not an ordinary cut. This was not something you just kind of went over a nail or a corner. This was done with a knife, with the deliberate intent that the tire would not deflate immediately, but would explode when at a high speed on the highway."
Wow.
And so you're talking about, at this point, attempted murder. Because if it's the front tire of a bus, I actually have a bus license, so I know this. You can lose control. Yeah, I'm a backup bus driver sometimes. So, it's like a family business. We all do multiple things. You can lose control of the vehicle. And of course, you have other cars around, innocent bystanders, and you have innocent dancers on the bus, 40 people on the bus. And this happened again in Costa Mesa. I discovered it simultaneously on our truck in Little Rock, Arkansas, the very next day. We had a flat tire traveling from Memphis to Little Rock the night before. And this happened in Costa Mesa last year. There's multiple cases of this, the tire slashing. We had tampering with our gas tanks. In one case, one guy was in a police chase and they abandoned his pickup truck and ran away. And there's not going to be the Chinese ambassador or the foreign affairs minister doing this. They hire multiple levels down, right? They have their brokers, and then they have and you eventually usually get like an African American or Korean. We had a guy who was in Atlanta who was involved in helping break the Great Firewall. He's not part of Shen Yun, but he's a Falun Gong practitioner. In Atlanta, he was involved in creating the software and the platforms that allow people in China to circumvent the internet blockade in China and allow them free access to the internet. These are a group of Falun Gong practitioners who did this and actually allowed people in Iran and other countries to use this many years later. So people broke into his house, Koreans, beat him up, rolled him into a carpet, took only his computers, almost killed him, and then left with just a couple of his computers and none of the other valuables. This stuff has happened several times. We had a choreographer had a similar experience. Wasn't beaten up, fortunately, but they took only the stuff that was related to his work. And then we had a bomb threat at the Kennedy Center just in February. We're getting ready for our performances, a 12-show run at the Kennedy Center, the heart of the nation in the United States. And around 10:45, the fire alarm goes off. I'm like, oh, fire alarm, okay, there's going to be a delay, let's go. And then we go out. None of us are dressed properly. It's 20 degrees outside, not quite Toronto cold, but cold. And, they're escorting us out. And the guy comes over to the loudspeaker and says, "This is not a drill. Evacuate immediately." And as they're walking us around the complex, I'm thinking you would only have this sense of urgency if you had an active shooter or a bomb. This is not a fire or some malfunction. And it was this whole complex with 6 different performing arts companies evacuated hundreds of people at the same time, standing outside for 3 hours on our setup day. And nobody knew what was going on. But I had a hunch because at that point we had received several dozen of these. And I went to our stage manager and said, "Is this about us?" And he said, "Let me go check." And he checked with their production manager, and they said, "Yeah, this is about you guys." Turns out they got an email bomb threat saying, "We're going to turn this place to rubble if you allow Shen Yun to perform." And we had over 100 of these by the end of tour, and both at our headquarters and at theaters around the world, including actually we had one in Vancouver when I was performing there. That was in late March of the previous of 2024 tour. So that's when it started, was in late March. And sometimes it's these very just gory descriptions of what they're going to do to our kids, or throw our daughters off of buildings after they're gang raped and mutilated, all these different things. And it's all false. It's all just a scare tactic, of course, until it's not. It's a scare tactic. These are pranks trying to scare people. We always take it really seriously. The police
Right.
come, the canines come, they do what they can. But there's never been anything. It's just somebody. And when this happened, we were in Taiwan. And with this, I'll wrap up as long answer to your question. They traced the emails because the FBI has not been able to, or not openly spoken of being able to, trace where these are coming from. They're using VPNs. They're not traceable, and they taunt us by saying, "You can't find us. We're going to keep sending these for forever." But in Taiwan, they actually traced it to the Huawei Research Institute in Xi'an, China. Multiple of these, and they're
Wow.
all the same language and the same type of sender address as all the other ones.
You have performers in Shen Yun who many of them are Falun Gong practitioners, but and many of them have family members that have been detained, tortured, or killed in China. Correct?
Yes, that is correct. We actually did a survey about this earlier this year. We found that we have in our company alone 92 artists, dancers, musicians, choreographers who have been directly impacted by the persecution, sometimes themselves. We have a percussionist who spent 6 years in prison. His family was torn apart. He has a kid there, never seen that person ever since they, left China, had to flee China. And we have other performers who were orphaned, who literally lost family members to torture. We have a woman by the name of Eli Rausch. She actually just published a piece about this in The Hill, talking about what happened to her. And when she was 4 years old, police broke into their house and took her father away. She remembers standing by the window, seeing them take the father out, and the police cars disappearing. And then 2 weeks later, he was killed in a labor camp, and they eventually fled China. And there's so many stories like that, and these are some of the more dramatic ones, but there are a lot of them. There's another performer whose aunt was an international case, a woman by the name of Gao Rongrong. She was shocked with electric batons on her face, and her pictures of the charred face actually were published internationally. The family at great risk was able to smuggle it out, and then she died as well. What is more common is that you grow up without a parent. They're in and out of detention. An example was this woman who's now a musician who fled to Hong Kong as a kid, and all of a sudden she's just living there with her dad, and all of a sudden one day the dad comes home with a woman that she doesn't know, and turns out that's her mom, right? She never really remembered her. And then you have just grandparents who can't see their kids one last time before they leave. Not, people here, performers just can't go back to see their elderly and sick parents, or, weddings, grandkids, none of this, because everybody's blacklisted. Everybody can't go back. Performers' family members in China are being harassed there. They're being threatened to try to get their kids to go back to China, where, of course, they'll be arrested as soon as they get to the airport, or they'll try to turn them to become spies. And this just goes on and on and on. So it's the story of the persecution of Falun Gong. And we actually have on our website, if people are interested, this is at shenyun.org under news. We have this page, and it's really moving. We have these performers holding a picture of their family member and telling about what happened to that person. And there's 92 of them. So this is something that is just so real for these people. So when we talk about the persecution on stage, they're literally dancing for their family members that they've lost or who are still in jail, and other families like them, because they value the freedom of speech that they have performing around the world. Of course, we can't perform in China, but they want to be the voice for those people who are still there.
For people listening who this is new to them and think, wow, forced organ harvesting in 2025, that's just too monstrous to believe, or maybe they dismiss it as unproven. Point them to someplace online You mentioned shenyun.org. Other, I don't know, where else can they, a repository of documentation where they can find evidence for this?
Sure. So a few resources about organ harvesting specifically. I would say the Falun Dafa Information Center. Falun Dafa is same as Falun Gong's, just different name. So that's FALUNINFO, faluninfo.net. They have a whole section on organ harvesting there, including congressional hearings and testimonials and reports, and there's a lot of information there. So when people, especially in the media, say, "Oh, these are accusations, claims," no, this is actually very well documented at this point. About that, there's also Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting. That's DAFOH. If you look those up, they have a lot of reports there. Ethan Gutmann, who I mentioned, see that here. Here's his book, who I work with on this book, The Slaughter. It's on Amazon. There's a bunch of negative reviews that were all posted at once with very bad English.
Yes, wink, wink.
This is a very comprehensive history of the persecution of Falun Gong and how organ harvesting came to be. He also has writings on other issues as well. Those would be some really great places to go. For people who are on the south side of the border, we have the Falun Gong Protection Act in Congress right now, and I think senators need to hear from people that this is important, because we're up against a lot, right? There's a lot of interest in China, even with the tariffs and this and that, and there's still so many interest groups, so many strong lobbies, and just like with everything else, you might be doing the work of the CCP without even realizing, because they're going to work through proxies, and by the time they feed you the breadcrumbs and give you all these other carrots and sticks, you don't even know who you're working for anymore. And so we have to fight all that in the media. We're facing a tremendous disinformation campaign against Falun Gong, against Shen Yun, that traces back to a campaign that the CCP launched a couple of years ago to really try to escalate the battle against Shen Yun and against Falun Gong overseas, because they realized they were losing it. And so their orders directly from Xi Jinping saying to be more creative and to use media, disinformation, and lawfare, as well as sleeper cells of agents, to try to make American society turn against Falun Gong and turn against Shen Yun, to cancel shows, to start investigations, and even pass laws or have lawsuits against us. And so we've actually seen that play out. We knew it was coming, and then we've seen it play out over the last few months. So we're up against a lot with this.
Leeshai Lemish, Falun Gong, and forced organ harvesting. It's just, again, it's a nightmare. It's almost so monstrous to defy belief. So thank you so much for sharing this with my listeners, and again, the websites that we should be aware of.
Faluninfo.net would be a great one. Shenyun.org would be the other one.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.